You're not just hurt, you're vulnerable. There's a gash on your arm. You can feel it swelling, bleeding, possibly festering. But there's no doctor, no herb, no medicine cabinet. You're tens of thousands of years in the past with only what you can find, carry, and remember. So what do? What would they have done, the early humans who walked this earth long before antibiotics, before band-aids, before we even understood what infection was? This was their daily gamble. One wrong step, one bad cut, and nature could kill you. But they had a secret. Tools, roots, stones, smokes, bones, a crude but brilliant system of healing you've likely never considered. It was the world's first aid kit, born not from science but survival. Now you're going to open it, and once you do, you'll never look at human health the same way again. The wind hits first, not as a breeze but as a warning, sharp, cold, full of teeth. It cuts through the fur wrapped around your shoulders and drives straight into your bones. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snaps, not from the wind, from something heavier. You stop moving, breath tightens, muscles brace, because out here, silence is never silence, it's surveillance. You are being watched. This is not your world. Not yet. You've been dropped into the Paleolithic wild and nothing cares if you survive it. The trees do not offer comfort. The ground does not yield. The animals that once fled from your scent now stalk you from the shadows. You are not an apex predator. You are meat. And the only thing standing between your body and oblivion is your ability to outthink pain, to outmaneuver injury, to stay whole just long enough to live another day. But you won't stay whole, not out here. Because eventually, something will go wrong. Maybe it's a slip on wet rock, your foot twisting with a sudden crack you feel before you hear. Maybe it's a sharp thorn carving a deep line across your thigh as you run. Or maybe it's just the cold, not dramatic, not cinematic, but steady and slow. A creeping death that blackens toes and fingers until you don't notice they're gone. Until it's too late. Out here, a mistake isn't just inconvenient, it's an inheritance. Because your body is soft, and this world is not. Your skin tears, your joints swell, your blood attracts insects, and your sweat lures predators. You are a wound waiting to happen, and wounds don't get second chances in the Ice Age. There are no antibiotics, no bandages, no clean water on demand. A single cut can become a sentence. A fever can spiral into death. And still you must move, hunt, carry, sleep, and heal somehow. But healing isn't a luxury. It's not rest, not peace, not time off. Out here, healing is strategy. You don't recover if you're lucky. You recover if you know how. And someone, long before you, began to learn. You don't know who she was. Maybe she was the first to notice that chewing on willow bark dulled the ache in her jaw. Maybe he smeared mud on a burn and found the pain cooled by something more than temperature. Maybe someone watched a wounded deer roll in a bed of moss and tried the same thing on a festering leg. The knowledge didn't come in books, it came in scars. It came when survival meant experimentation, when memory became medicine, when your clan's oldest woman wasn't just the storyteller, she was the archive of what worked and what killed. The things she whispered as she cleaned a wound weren't superstition, they were code. And if you were listening, you might survive what the forest throws next. Because the forest will throw something next. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't wait, and it doesn't apologize. You need to know what bark stops bleeding, what leaf draws out venom, which root numbs pain, and which one ends it for good, because they look the same. And grabbing the wrong one is a mistake you don't get to make twice. Every step you take now is part of a test, a quiet, relentless test of memory, of instinct, of adaptation. Because this isn't just about what you eat. It's about what you carry. And somewhere in the pouch slung over your hip, alongside the flint knife and dried meat, you begin to assemble something else. A scrap of birch fungus, a clump of dry moss, a hollowed bone filled with powdered clay. You don't call it anything yet, there's no word for first aid kit. But piece by piece, wound by wound, you're building it anyway. Not because you want to, because the body demands it. You learn which scratches can be ignored and which ones pulse with danger. You learn the heat behind a cut can mean infection, a threat more invisible and more ruthless than the wolf you chased away last night. You learn that healing is never passive. It's a hunt for time, for tools, for trust in what your hands remember. But even memory isn't enough, because pain clouds it, panic crushes it. And when someone you love goes down, a broken ankle, a bite, a burn, the only thing between death and recovery is your ability to stay calm, to remember which tree bleeds a resin that seals, which lichen keeps flies away, which fire-smoked ash kills rot. Suddenly, medicine isn't something outside of you. It's you, it's in your fingertips, your breath, your knowing. And the body that once felt so fragile begins to feel like something more. A terrain, a battlefield, a puzzle that can be solved if you listen close enough. But the forest isn't finished testing you yet. Because healing doesn't always mean returning to what you were. Sometimes it means surviving in spite of it. A hunter walks with a limp now, but walks. A child's face is scarred, but he grows. Each mark becomes a reminder, not of weakness, but of intelligence, of memory passed not through words, but through tissue, through time. And this is how it began. Not in hospitals, not in textbooks, but here, in dirt, in pain, in necessity. Healing wasn't invented, it was earned. One wound at a time. But something deeper was happening beneath the scars. If you were there, which memory would you trust? The pain you lived through, or the cure you barely remember? And if your life depended on a leaf, a stone, or a whisper, would you recognize it in time? You didn't see the stone. It was buried beneath frost-hardened dirt, half covered in lichen, jagged like a broken tooth. You stepped on it mid-stride, your momentum forcing your ankle sideways. There was a snap, a sickening, deep sound, and then you were on the ground. The pain doesn't come immediately. First is confusion, then adrenaline, then the heat. It spreads fast. You try to stand. You can't. Your body knows before your mind does. Something is wrong inside. Something is broken. Welcome to the moment every early human feared. Because in this world, a broken bone isn't a temporary setback. It's a death sentence unless you understand what's happening beneath the skin and how to fight it. You look down. Your ankle is already swelling, skin stretching tight like a drum. Blood is pooling beneath the surface. a bruise blooming in slow motion. You're not just injured, you're vulnerable and your body knows it. The first system to respond isn't your muscles or your mind, it's your blood. Inside you, platelets, tiny fragments of cells, rush to the site of trauma. They stick together, forming a makeshift plug, sealing ruptured vessels like biological sandbags. You don't see them, but you feel their work in the warmth of the wound, the throbbing pressure that builds. Your body is trying to stop the bleed, to close the gates. But this is just the beginning. Next comes inflammation. The skin reddens, tightens, flares with heat. Fluid seeps into the damaged area, swelling it. White blood cells, your immune system's soldiers, begin to swarm, identifying threats, devouring invaders. They come not because you're safe, but because your body thinks it's under siege. And in a way, it is. Because wounds don't stay simple in the wild. Dirt carries bacteria. Claws and teeth leave behind rot. Even the wooden splinter from a branch you brushed against can become a Trojan horse for infection. The moment your skin opens, the outside world rushes in. And unless you stop it, that world will begin to rot you from the inside out. But what does that look like? It starts with heat, then pain, then pus, thick, discolored, reeking. You'll smell the infection before you see it. Your body will spike a fever in response, trying to burn out the invader. You'll sweat through the night, shiver through the morning, and if the infection wins, your blood becomes septic. Your organs begin to fail. Your consciousness fades like a torch in the wind. This is the biology of death, slow and microscopic. But you're not giving in. You crawl to a stream, submerge the ankle, let the cold take the swelling down. Then you dig for a specific moss that wicks away pus. You find a fibrous bark that, when chewed, eases the pain. You remember what the elders said about clean ash sealing open wounds. You make a poultice. You wrap the joint tight with animal sinew. And then you wait. This is not medicine as comfort. This is medicine as war. Because beneath the skin, your body is rebuilding. Slowly, meticulously, specialized cells begin to remove damaged tissue. Others arrive to knit fibers, build scaffolding, and lay down calcium where the bones split. The pain doesn't mean you're broken. The pain means you're healing. But healing costs energy, and time, and protection. Out here, that's a luxury. So now you face another choice: move and risk re-injury, or stay and risk exposure. The predators can smell blood. The tribe may be moving on. There's no bed to rest in, no doctor to ask. Just your instincts and what you've learned from every scar you've ever carried. And so you limp, you adapt, you use a branch as a crutch, you lean more on your arms, you learn to fall in ways that protect the injured limb. The pain sharpens your awareness. Every step is a negotiation between will and warning. And still, your body works. Because deep inside, past the nerves and swelling and bruises, there is a blueprint, one written long before you, one inherited from ancestors who fell and healed and remembered. Your blood knows what to do, your bones know how to knit, and your brain, despite the agony, rewires itself to keep moving forward. That's the hidden story of wounds. They are not failures. They are adaptations in progress. Each scar is a chapter in your survival. Even bruises have purpose. They aren't just signs of damage, they are signals, maps, markers that tell you what to protect, what to favor, where to be cautious. Your body is talking to you, urgently, fluently, and if you listen, you increase your odds of making it to the next day. But if you ignore the swelling, or move too soon, or miss the early signs of infection, you'll pay the price. You'll feel the limb go hot, then numb, then useless. You'll feel your breath shorten, your heart race. You'll feel the sickness move from your foot to your lungs, to your gut, to your brain, and then no more feeling at all. That's what hangs in the balance. This isn't a dramatization. This is the real cost of trauma without treatment, and the real miracle of bodies that learn how to survive anyway. And you start to realize something. Healing didn't begin with knowledge. It began with awareness. Someone thousands of years ago noticed that covering a wound stopped it from festering, that splinting a limb kept the pain from spreading, that cooling the skin calmed the fire within. These weren't doctors. They were watchers, listeners, survivors. And now so are you. Because you've felt the crack of bone. You've watched your blood do its silent, sacred work. You've battled inflammation with nothing but memory and moss, and your body is still yours. Is still healing, is still alive. So the next time pain flares, you won't just suffer it. You'll understand it, read it, respond to it, because you've seen how it works not in a textbook but in your own trembling hands. And as you rest tonight, beside the fire you built with one good leg and a mouthful of pain-numbing bark, you'll whisper a truth to yourself that every ancient human learned the hard way. Wounds don't just hurt, they teach. And if you listen, they just might save your life. You're crawling now, not out of choice, but because standing has become impossible. Your wound throbs with each heartbeat, a silent drumbeat of urgency echoing through your bones. The forest blurs in front of you, too much blood lost, too little time. But you aren't heading back to the fire. You're heading into the green. Because somewhere in this undergrowth is the answer. You don't know its name. No one does. There are no labels, no guides, no prescriptions. There is only a whisper from the old woman who once muttered something about the leaf that cools, or from the hunter who crushed a certain stem between his teeth and stopped howling long enough to set a broken arm. Maybe they were right. Maybe they were lucky. Or maybe they just remembered. Because that's the only map you have now. Memory and myth, passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation. And somewhere in the chlorophyll maze around you is salvation or your last mistake. You reach out and grab a plant. Its leaves are soft, speckled, familiar. You crush one between your fingers, inhale deeply. Bitter, that's good. Bitter often means medicine or poison. The line between cure and killer isn't written in color or scent. It's written in context and cost. Some roots stop bleeding. Some bark reduces fever. Some berries end things. And early humans didn't learn this through textbooks. They learned it through trial, through loss, through watching the world as if it were whispering secrets only the desperate could hear. Because in truth it was. The forest isn't scenery, it's pharmacy. An ancient, sprawling lab with formulas wrapped in leaves and solutions hidden in sap. But the code isn't easy to crack. So how did your ancestors begin? They watched the animals. You've seen it yourself, the wounded deer that seeks out a specific clump of plants and chews slowly, like ritual. The bear that rolls in crushed mint before sleeping, its breath steadied by something you don't yet understand. Even birds select particular herbs to line their nests, not for comfort, but for their antibacterial properties. You thought it was instinct, but what if it's intelligence? What if nature has been self-medicating all along? And what if your species learned to heal by spying on it? That's how it began, watching, mimicking, then testing. The first human who smeared sap from a willow tree across a gash didn't know she was discovering salicylic acid, the basis for aspirin. She only knew it dulled the pain. The man who chewed on yarrow leaves after a battle didn't know it was a styptic herb that constricts blood vessels. He only knew he didn't bleed out. Trial by pain, trial by survival, trial by death. Because not every experiment ended well. There were the roots that stopped hearts, the berries that blurred vision, the fungi that turned breath into convulsions, and those failures were never forgotten. The plants that killed were marked in stories, in symbols, in the expressions of elders who said, "Not that one with a glance sharp enough to cut." Knowledge wasn't optional, it was earned. And now it's your turn to earn it. You drag yourself to a moss-covered rock and rest. You open the pouch at your side not for food, but for the fragments of healing you've collected. A bundle of chewed willow bark, a waxy leaf that smells like turpentine, a pinch of powdered red clay. You begin to remember. Birch polypore dried and packed into wounds, slows infection. Mugwort leaves crushed into a pulp ease muscle spasms. Pine sap, warmed and spread across a cut, seals skin like a resin bandage. Garlic, wild and potent, burns like fire but kills bacteria. Charcoal ground fine, draws out venom. Each item is part of a forgotten pharmacy, not forgotten because it failed, but because we stopped needing to remember. But you remember now. Because need has returned. The wound on your leg is angry, the flesh around it tight and warm. You crush a few yarrow leaves, smear them over the opening, then pack the whole thing in moss to keep flies off. You chew willow bark, even though the taste is vile, because the ache in your leg is worse. And in that moment, you are both patient and practitioner. You are not healing by accident. You are healing by intention. But intention without knowledge can still kill. Because for every plant that helps, there is one that harms. A leaf that numbs and shuts down the lungs. A root that calms and stops the heart. A berry that purges and never stops. So how do you tell them apart? By remembering, by pattern, by failure passed down. The green code was never written, it was lived, and passed through generations as story, as ritual, as superstition rooted in survival. It became embedded in culture, embedded in you. And now, as you lie back and wait for the fever to break, you realize the plants aren't magic. They're memory, compressed into scent and color and taste. They don't heal because they're miraculous. They heal because your ancestors paid attention, because someone thousands of years ago dared to say, "Let's try this and see what happens." And someone else watched what happened, and someone else remembered. This isn't folklore. This is pharmacology written in bark, bound in leaf. And now it's written on your skin. Because the swelling is down, the heat is easing. You're still alive, not just because your body fought, but because the forest helped and you knew how to ask. So tomorrow, you'll move again. Not easily, not painlessly, but with purpose. And before you leave, you'll take a cutting from the plant that worked. You'll dry it, wrap it in hide, store it in the pouch at your side. Your first aid kit is growing, one leaf at a time. You build it for warmth. Your fingers are stiff. The forest breathes cold into your bones. So you gather bark and brittle twigs, stack them like a ritual you've done 1,000 times. Spark, smoke, flame. But tonight, the fire is more than heat. Tonight, it's your healer. Because your wound is still raw. The moss dressing helped, the bitter bark dulled the ache. But infection waits like a shadow. You can feel it, heat simmering under skin, a pulse of pressure where pain shouldn't be. You don't have antibiotics, you have fire. And it might save your life. Or end it. You reach for a stone from the edge of the flame. It's hot, glowing faintly, hissing when touched with damp cloth. You lift the binding on your wound. The flesh is dark red, the edges angry. You brace yourself. Then pressure. You press the hot stone to the wound. You don't scream, you can't. The pain pulls every muscle tight like stretched wire. For a moment you see stars. Then the smell hits burnt skin and old blood like a forge mixed with rot. It's horrifying, it's working. This is cauterization. Not science, survival. You didn't read about it. You watched someone do it long ago in a moment just like this. They pressed fire to a cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. They lived. So now you try. You're not just burning flesh. You're sealing it, killing bacteria, stopping a slow death with a sudden, controlled agony. And this is the paradox of fire. It destroys, but under your control it heals. Early humans didn't know what germs were, but they knew something lived in wounds. Something invisible that made clean cuts rot, made warriors feverish, made bruises swell into poison. They didn't have a microscope, they had observation. And the evidence was clear. Wounds cleaned with fire festered less. Tools passed through smoke caused fewer deaths. Water boiled before drinking kept sickness at bay. Somehow, fire pushed back the darkness inside the body just as it lit the night. You lean close to the flames. Watch how the smoke rises, curling around your fingers. You remember how elders used to smoke wounds gently, wafting dry herbs over the skin. Not just ritual, remedy. The smoke killed tiny invaders. It dried out pus. It masked scent that predators followed. Some tribes even inhaled smoke to clear the lungs, pine, eucalyptus, juniper. The fire became a pharmacy in vapor. And then there's the ash. You scoop some now, soft and gray, from beneath the burning logs. You remember it being packed into gashes, mixed with fat, smoothed over insect bites. Something in it, alkaline, cleansing, stripped away rot. ash purified. It's sterile in a way nothing else you carry is. You mix a bit with water, smear it on a bite near your knee. It stings, but it feels clean. No crawl, no itch, just quiet. The fire isn't just for warmth anymore. It's your surgeon, your tool chest, your clean room. And yet it's also sacred. You remember when the fire was lit during births to keep the mother warm, yes, but also to protect. Smoke formed a barrier. Heat kept life close. Some say the spirit of flame guided the baby in. At funerals, fire was the final purifier, reducing the body to ash, freeing the soul. It closed the cycle. Ritual and remedy, one and the same. The fire didn't just heal the body. It gave the people power over life and death, control in a world ruled by chaos. Fear faded in firelight, not just because the beast stayed back, but because your ancestors believed the flame watched over them. You believe it now. Because here you are, ankle half-healed, skin blackened but closed, pain finally dulling, alive. Because of fire. And there's something poetic in it. You, a fragile animal wrapped in skin and nerve, staring down death, and your answer is light, heat, smoke. A thing that consumes to protect, burns to cleanse. Your ancestors didn't stumble into this knowledge. They learned by trying, by failing, by trusting the fire enough to get close, but never so close they forgot its hunger. They tested what happened when tools were passed through flame, when herbs were added to smoke, when a spearhead was heated red before piercing a swollen abscess. They watched what worked and passed it on. That's why you know this now. Because someone before you dared to turn pain into medicine. So tomorrow, when you pack your tools, the moss, the bark, the powdered roots, you'll pack embers too. You'll wrap them in fungi that smolder slow, carry them in bark like coals in a cradle. Because fire must be carried, not just for heat, not just for cooking, but because it heals, because it saves, and because without it, everything around you becomes colder, riskier, deadlier. Tonight, fire is your ally, not tamed but trusted. A surgeon that asks only one thing, respect. You stare into the flame one last time before sleep. Watch it flicker across the inside of your shelter. You see it now for what it truly is, not just light, but knowledge, carved in flickers, written in smoke. Tomorrow it may be storming, or freezing, or worse. But tonight, wrapped in the scent of ash and the pulse of slow healing, you whisper a simple truth that every ancient survivor eventually learned. Sometimes the thing that burns you is the only thing that saves you. You open the pouch. It's not made of cloth, not stitched in any modern sense. It's hide cured stiff, folded with care. It smells of smoke and sweat, and it creaks like old bark. But inside, it holds a kind of genius that could keep you alive. You lay the contents out one by one. A sharpened sliver of bone, a chipped flint blade, threads twisted from sinew, a tiny scoop carved from antler, a lump of sticky resin, hardened but still pliable with heat, powdered minerals sealed in dried bladder. At first glance, it looks like junk, crude, primitive. But to you in this world, these are not artifacts. They are instruments, tools of healing, and they are every bit as crucial as fire or food. You pick up the bone sliver. It's smooth and thin, sharp enough to cut. Not a weapon, but a scalpel, carved from an animal once hunted for survival, now transformed into something more precise than its teeth ever were. You've seen it used to lance abscesses, to cut away blackened flesh, not with recklessness, but with the steady hand of someone who's done this many times before and learned where to stop. The sinew thread feels like leather. It's strong, flexible. You've watched it close gaping wounds, pass through skin using a bone needle pulled tight, tied off with steady fingers. No sterilization, no anesthetic, just grit, fire, and the memory of what happens when wounds stay open. You run your hand across the resin. Sticky, dark, with a pine scent sharp enough to sting the nose. Heat it gently over flame and it softens. Apply it warm to a wound and it seals like nature's glue. Waterproof, antibacterial, a barrier against the world. If you've ever watched a resin-treated gash heal clean, you stop thinking of it as tree sap. It becomes technology. And then there's the flint. You test the edge, still sharp, always sharp. It's one of the oldest materials humans ever shaped, and it never stops working. A tool for cutting, yes, but also scraping away infection, slicing strips of bark to bind wounds, even performing basic surgery when nothing else would do. Because when you live in a world without metal or medicine, ingenuity becomes law. Nothing is wasted. Every piece of the animal, every part of the plant is studied not just for food but for function. The small scoop of antler isn't just carved for beauty. It's used to measure powdered herbs, to mix ash with fat, to pack wounds with crushed bark. It's delicate work in a brutal world. And even the mineral dust, white, chalky, sealed tight, has purpose. You recognize it as kale and clay. It dries wounds, absorbs moisture. Sometimes it's mixed with charcoal, sometimes with honey, applied thick to burns or rashes. A poultice, a dressing, a treatment born not in labs but in the dirt. None of this is accidental. Every object in this pouch was chosen because someone, somewhere, figured out that it helped, that it did more good than harm, that it bought time for the body to do what it does best, heal. You remember watching the elders treat a dislocated shoulder. One held the arm, another heated resin and coated a stick, which they used to create tension as the joint popped back into place. Brutal, yes, but effective. And they wrapped the joint in plant fibers soaked in honey and ash, not because it looked impressive, but because it worked. It always comes back to that. What works? Survival logic. In the modern world, medicine is sanitized, certified, labeled. But here, it's about results, about remembering the rare times when people lived and reverse engineering why. You stare again at the objects. They're quiet, unassuming. They don't glow or beep. They don't promise miracles, but they hold generations of trial and error refinement. Each one carries a lineage of pain and of people who refused to give up when blood poured too fast or fevers burned too hot. That flint blade, someone once used it to cut open a limb swollen from infection, not out of cruelty but desperation. And when that person survived, the blade wasn't feared. It was respected. That sinew thread, maybe it stitched together a hunter's leg after a boar's tusk tore it open, kept him walking, kept him alive. That resin, maybe it sealed the wound of a mother giving birth in the cold season, when nothing could be allowed to fester. These tools aren't primitive. They're sophisticated, not in design but in purpose, because real sophistication is about understanding systems, and early humans understood the most critical system of all, the body in crisis. They learned where tendons run, where arteries hide, where to press when blood won't stop. They didn't have anatomy charts. They had mistakes and memory. And slowly, painfully, they crafted kits like this one, not for hunting, but for mending. And now you carry one. Not out of nostalgia, out of necessity. Because you've felt what it means to be helpless in the face of injury. You've seen wounds go bad. You've lost people to infection, to shock, to things that would have been trivial with a few tools and a little knowledge. But now you have both. So the next time blood spills, you won't just panic. You'll open this pouch. You'll pick the right blade, choose the right fiber, heat the resin, measure the powder, steady your hand. And maybe, just maybe, someone will live because you did. That's not primitive. That's power. You press the bare fat into your heel, slow and deliberate. The crack runs deep, torn by cold, cracked by travel, split by time. But the fat melts into it like warm wax, sealing the wound, softening the pain. It's not a balm you bought. There's no label, no expiration date. Just rendered fat from a predator you once feared, now transformed into medicine. You realize what once threatened your life now helps preserve it. This is the forgotten side of survival, not just what you took from animals, but what you learned through them. Healing wasn't limited to plants. It never was. It came from every corner of the living world: fur, flesh, bone, blood. The animal body became both metaphor and mechanism, and early humans weren't guessing. They were watching, observing, repeating what worked. You remember watching the elders harvest honey carefully, reverently, not just for food, but for wounds. You watched them smear it across raw flesh, over burns, into cracked lips. It wasn't just for sweetness. It was for sterility. Honey, thick, golden, antimicrobial, was nature's antibiotic before we even had a name for microbes. You could almost feel it drawing out infection, creating a barrier no dirt could breach, a clean layer over chaos. And it worked, long before anyone could explain why. Then there's sinew. You've used it before, twisted and pulled into thread, threaded through bone needles to close wounds. But even more than stitching, sinew became structure. Splints, bindings, pressure to reduce swelling. When soaked and dried, it became like steel, primitive, yes, but precise. Even horn and antler held purpose. You run your hand along one now, a curved sliver shaped into a spoon. It's been used to scrape away pus, to deliver powdered roots into open gashes. Hard, smooth, uninfected. You've even seen horn ground into powder, mixed with charcoal and fat, and used to treat burns. It's easy to forget that every animal, predator or prey, was once a pharmacopoeia. Bare fat wasn't just for skin. It was used to ease sore joints, to carry heat deep into tissue. Wolf saliva was watched carefully, not applied but mimicked. Some believe the way wolves licked wounds hinted at healing properties. Maybe enzymes, maybe antiseptic agents, or maybe just the idea that nature itself knew how to heal. And it wasn't all superstition. You remember watching a dying man's wound packed with dried marrow fat, rich in nutrients, slow to spoil. It kept the flesh supple. It didn't save him, but it gave him more time. And in the world you live in, time is often the difference between life and loss. There's glue, too. Boiled hooves reduced and thickened, a sticky paste used to close skin when thread wouldn't hold. It wasn't pretty, but it stuck, and it lasted. Even the stomach lining of animals, particularly deer and elk, was used. Dried, cleaned, cut into sheets, used like a natural gauze to wrap burns or placed like a bandage on weeping wounds. The enzymes in it help draw out fluids. You could almost see the skin start to knit. And then there's bile. You tasted it once, bitter as poison, but you've also seen it smeared on fungal infections. Some tribes believed it slowed decay. Others used it in ritual. And often, ritual was just wisdom that hadn't yet been measured. The truth is, healing didn't come from any one place. It came from every living thing. You've watched birds press their wounds into anthills, instinctively using the formic acid to cleanse. You've seen bears roll in herbs. Wolves chew certain roots. Early humans didn't just watch plants. They watched everything. They stole secrets from nature's quiet experiments, often at great cost. Sometimes you think the best healers weren't shamans at all. They were mimics, biologists without the word. They followed vultures to carrion to understand decay. They studied parasites to learn what not to let inside the skin. They saw which animals avoided poisonous mushrooms and which ones survived snakebite. And from animals, they learned that pain wasn't always the enemy. It was information. Just like that fat in your heel now, soothing, yes, but also signaling. That crack isn't just skin deep. It's telling you something about wear, about water, about time. You rub the rest across your knuckles. And you think of how much wisdom is buried in things we once saw only as meat. That wool could be bandage. That bone could be scaffold. That fat could be medicine. And above all, that the living world wants to heal. That healing isn't just something you do to the body. It's something the body already knows how to do if you give it the right materials. You look down at your pouch, now heavier with fat, sinew, dried gut, a piece of smoked honeycomb. You smile, not because it's beautiful, but because it works. And that's all that matters. Your nerves are on fire. The wound is days old, but it hasn't stopped aching. A dull, rhythmic throb pulses with your heartbeat. It doesn't let you sleep. It doesn't let you think. It owns you now, and all you want is silence. But in this world, silence isn't easy. Pain is part of life. It's a language your body speaks fluently and constantly. Blisters from walking, cuts that fester, teeth that grind in their roots, joints that burn from cold. You've seen people suffer quietly. You've seen them scream. And now it's your turn. But tonight, the healer brings something. A bundle of bark, stripped from a pale tree by the water. Bitterness floods your tongue as she hands you the brew. You try to swallow, it hits like acid. But within the hour, the pain softens, just slightly. You can move again. You can breathe. It doesn't cure the wound, but for the first time in days, you feel like you again. That tree was willow, the same tree the deer avoid chewing, the same one the elders say was watched by the gods. Now you know why. It contains a chemical, you don't know the name, but you know the feeling. It quiets the pain, not completely, but enough. And in this world, enough is a miracle. Painkillers weren't always about mastery. They were about mercy, and early humans didn't stumble blindly into them. They followed patterns, noticed that chewing certain barks numbed the gums, that certain roots made wounds burn less, that milk from a pale flower made warriors sleep more peacefully after battle. And that's how you first hear of the poppy. Its petals are delicate, its seeds are tiny, but its unripe pods hold a thick white latex. You've seen it scraped off and dried, turned into resin, smoked, swallowed, rubbed into wounds, and always with caution. Because too much brings sleep, and sometimes sleep becomes death. But used carefully, it's not poison, it's power. You once saw a healer rub poppy milk into a broken leg before setting the bone. The patient passed out, didn't scream. When he woke, he thanked the gods for the darkness. Not all painkillers numb the body. Some confused it. Fermented roots like kava or mandrake brought on dizziness, disorientation, even visions. But they dulled the pain, clouded the edges, allowed the mind to slip sideways when the body was trapped in agony. You've tried one yourself. A tea made from a root the elders wouldn't name. It made the world shimmer, made time skip. You lost your fear. You also lost your balance, but your cracked ribs stopped throbbing. And in that moment, it felt like magic. You've chewed on coca leaves too, passed around during long climbs or given to those with infected wounds. They didn't just energize, they numbed. Your mouth, your nerves, even the deep ache in your back. For a while, you forgot what it meant to suffer. Not all of these remedies were safe. Some were deadly. You remember the story of the twin brothers who both took too much of the red mushroom with the white spots. One survived, one didn't, but the survivor swore he didn't feel the knife they used to drain his abscess. He said the world turned quiet and kind. That's the razor's edge of ancient pharmacology. Relief always flirted with risk. There was no dosage chart, no pharmacy, only memory, caution, and stories. Some passed down like sacred recipes, others buried, lost because they cost someone too much. But over time, patterns emerged. Willow for aching joints, poppy for unbearable pain, kava for wounds that wouldn't let you rest, alcohol from fermented fruit for crude surgeries, animal venom, sometimes in microdoses, to cause numbness before cutting, hallucinogenic plants to dissociate the mind from the body when no other option existed. Each one a gamble, each one chosen not for comfort but for survival. Because pain wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. It stopped you from walking, from hunting, from defending your shelter. In a world of predators and scarcity, pain was vulnerability. And the first painkillers were shields. Even when they failed, the idea of relief gave strength. That's why you still carry that pouch of dried bark, why you protect those roots, even when food runs low, because you know what it means to be at the mercy of your own nerves, and you know the cost of being without options. You grind more willow now, just in case. Your hands know the motion by heart. It's not superstition. It's not magic. It's chemistry learned not in labs but through centuries of trial, error, and unthinkable pain. You sip the brew. Still bitter, still ugly. But when the ache fades, you smile. Because here, where medicine is made of bark and dirt and desperation, that feeling, the easing of suffering, is the closest thing to grace you'll ever find. The wound looks clean, the bleeding has stopped, you even slept last night. But this morning, it smells wrong. Your skin is hot, the area swollen and tight. Pain pulses like a second heartbeat. And then you see it, that slick sheen, that milky fluid. The color is off. The skin is turning. You're not just injured anymore. You're infected. And though you can't name it, you already understand something primal. This is the real threat. Not the cut, not the break, but what came after. You can't see it. You can't track it. You can't fight it with teeth or fists. This isn't a predator you can stab. This is something else entirely, something invisible, crawling beneath the surface, eating you from the inside. And now every choice matters. You remember the fire, not just for warmth, but for cleansing. The elders passed the tools through the flame before using them, not out of ritual, out of necessity. They didn't know the word sterilization, but they knew something bad came from tools left unburnt. You remember the bitter-smelling smoke, how they'd burn juniper or pine needles and waft the smoke into sleeping spaces, not just for scent, for something deeper. They believed it chased away evil spirits. Maybe it did, or maybe it killed the bacteria floating in the air. They didn't know microbes, but they knew patterns. They saw wounds fester faster in the damp. They saw fevers come when filth grew thick. They saw healing happen faster when the wound stayed dry, clean, covered in clay or ash. You still carry that pouch of gray earth, clay from a riverbank upstream. The elders mix it with crushed charcoal and pack it into cuts. It draws out the rot, somehow. You've seen it work too many times to doubt it. And then there's honey. Not just for sweetness. You've watched it seal wounds, creating a barrier no fly can breach. You've seen deep gashes packed with it, then bound in hide. 3 days later, the smell is gone. The fever fades. The skin begins to stitch. Smoke, clay, honey, fire. These were your antibiotics, long before anyone named them. And when all else failed, there was distance. You remember the man who was cut deep on the hunt. The wound turned black. His breath turned shallow. They moved him outside the shelter into a lean-to on the edge of the clearing. His mother screamed, but the elders stood firm. He wasn't being punished. He was being isolated. And somehow they understood. The sickness could spread, the smell, the fever, the death. You learned early that the rot inside one man could leap into another, through touch, through shared blankets, through tools not cleaned. They couldn't explain transmission, but they saw it. And they feared it. You do too. Because you've seen what infection does. It starts slow, a warmth, a pulse. Then comes the fever, the shaking, the confusion, the red streaks that crawl toward the heart. You've seen men's minds break under it, their bodies swell, their fingers turn black, and by then there's nothing you can do. So you fight early, desperately. You wash with cold water from moving streams, not standing pools. You burn the bandages after they're used. You crush bitter herbs into paste and apply them while they still steam. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But the fear of the unseen drives you harder than any lion or spear ever could. Because lions you can run from, infection waits inside you. You once watched a healer make a salve from garlic and onion, mashed into bare fat and applied to a wound that wouldn't stop weeping. 3 days later it closed. Not a scar, a memory. You remember the wild mushrooms used to make a moldy poultice, green and white, soft as wool. The elders swore it ate the rot. You didn't understand. But when you used it on a child's infected cut, the swelling went down. He lived. Now you never travel without it. There's a sacred respect here for what you don't see. A war that happens below the skin, beyond the eye. One you fight with everything you can gather, burn, crush, or distill. And still, it's not always enough. You remember the girl with the small cut on her ankle, just a scrape, barely bleeding, but it swelled, then blackened. By nightfall, she was fevered. By dawn, she was gone. That's when you truly understood. Pain doesn't kill you. Blood doesn't kill you. What kills you is the thing that follows, the thing that takes root after the wound, that spreads like a shadow until it replaces you. And the ancients feared it too, even when they didn't know its name. Their stories speak of invisible spirits that live in rot, of wounds that speak with tongues of poison, of fevers that burn the soul. They were right in their way. Because microbes don't need belief to exist, they've always been there, always waiting. So now when you cut yourself, even shallow, you don't shrug it off. You wash, you burn, you cleanse. You wrap it in herbs, clay, honey, smoke, not just because of what you were taught, but because of what you've seen. The invisible enemy is real. And every small act of prevention is an act of rebellion. A declaration that you will not go quietly, that you have learned from the dead, that you are still here, not because you're strong, but because someone long ago figured out that honey sealed wounds, that clay drew out the rot, that smoke drove away sickness. You are here because they feared what they could not see and still fought anyway. And now so do you. You've been wounded before, but this time something feels different. The pain is no worse, the cut is no deeper, but your mind, it's heavy, dull. Fear drips through your thoughts like cold water. You can't sleep, you can't breathe right. You feel it building, the despair. And slowly you begin to wonder, am I going to die from this? You know what the elders say. As soon as the spirit breaks, the wound opens wider. And whether or not you believe in spirits, you know they're right. Because healing is not just flesh closing, it's belief taking root, and without it the body withers. You've seen the difference. One hunter slices his leg, and with every breath he chants to the sky. He's laughing by nightfall. Another man, same wound, curls into silence, refuses food, refuses help. He doesn't wake up. The wound didn't kill him. His fear did. And somewhere deep in your own thoughts, you feel the battle happening. So the healer gives you something, not medicine, a symbol, a bone carved with lines, circles, and eyes. She places it on your chest and sings. It isn't about gods, not really. It's about focus. It's about certainty. It's about the part of your brain that needs to feel in control, even when everything is falling apart. That bone means you're being watched over. The song means you are not alone. The firelight, the chanting, the hands pressed to your skin, it all builds the framework your mind needs to believe that healing is happening. And because your mind believes, your body follows. Placebo, maybe. But you've lived long enough to know placebo is power. You've watched people swallow useless roots and rise from their beds stronger. You've seen elders tie sacred knots over cuts and declare, "Now it will heal," and it does. You've seen warriors refuse to bleed after a ritual, even though they should have died. None of it makes scientific sense. And all of it works. Because psychology isn't a modern invention, it's primal. And prehistoric humans knew it intimately, even without words for it. They built rituals around wounds, the laying of hands, the chants under moonlight, the smearing of ochre as both antiseptic and symbol. You know the feeling of it, the thick red paste warming your skin, the sense of power it gives you. You don't just feel treated, you feel armored. They made pain meaningful, turned it into transformation. A cut wasn't just a wound, it was a test, an omen, a passage into deeper knowledge, and that meaning shaped recovery. Because when pain has meaning, it has borders, and when it has borders, you can endure it. You've heard the story. The girl with the broken arm who painted her pain onto the cave wall, a spiral of color, of motion, as if she had taken the pain out of her body and placed it somewhere else. And after that, she slept. Not cured, but coping. Symbol was survival. Song was therapy. Ceremony was architecture, built to give the mind something to lean against while the body stitched itself back together. Even touch became sacred. The warmth of hands, the brushing of hair from the face, the silent presence during fevered nights. These weren't just kindnesses, they were medicine. You felt it yourself, how pain recedes just slightly when someone sees you. You begin to understand. The brain doesn't distinguish between emotional safety and physical recovery. They're the same. So you sing now too. Low humming sounds that fill your chest and vibrate through the wound. You don't know why it helps, but it does. It calms the shaking, slows your thoughts, dulls the ache. Maybe it distracts your nervous system. Maybe it sends some ancient signal of safety. Or maybe, just maybe, it tells the body, you are safe enough to begin healing. In your darkest pain, you've seen strange things. Faces in the fire, whispers in your dreams, your ancestors standing just beyond the trees. And the healer says, good, they've come to guide you. Whether it's vision or hallucination doesn't matter. It helps, and so it counts. You realize now, the oldest medicine wasn't bark or honey or ash. It was story. The story that the wound is part of a larger cycle, that pain is survivable, that the tribe will hold you, that the gods are watching, that you matter. Without that story, you're just a damaged animal. With it, you're a human, enduring, transforming, healing. So now, when someone is hurt, you don't just bring herbs. You bring the old chants. You mark the skin with sacred charcoal. You whisper the names of ancestors who overcame worse. You give them a framework. Because you've seen what happens when the framework collapses. And you won't let that happen again. You stare into the fire. The pain is still there, but something in you has shifted. You don't feel helpless anymore. You feel held. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing really starts with. You're not alone. Not when you're bleeding, not when you're crying, not even when you're unconscious and burning with fever. You wake to hands careful, practiced, patient, pressing a poultice to your skin. You smell herbs. You hear singing. You see her. An old woman, bent by time but sharp with purpose. Her hands don't shake. They move as if they've done this 1,000 times because they have. She's not a healer because someone gave her a title. She's a healer because everyone comes to her when their body fails. She remembers what plant stopped the bleeding 5 winters ago. She remembers how her mother ground the roots just slightly longer. She remembers who survived what and why. This is medicine before medicine had a name. You watch as she binds the wound not just with hide but with song. She speaks gently, repeating the same phrases again and again, not just for comfort, for rhythm, for regulation. Her voice is a kind of medicine. You realize healing isn't about the ingredients. It's about the person who knows how to use them. Across the fire, a young hunter kneels beside a boy with a broken arm. He scared the boy, not the hunter, but the man doesn't show fear. He wraps the bone in padded bark and splints it with firm, curved wood. Not perfectly, but functionally, and more importantly, calmly. He learned that calm from the elder beside him, just like the elder once learned from someone else. Medicine isn't born in a moment, it's carried, like a flame passed from hand to hand. And often those first hands, they were mothers. You've seen it again and again. A mother wiping blood from a child's brow, blowing cool air over a fevered face, humming low as she grinds dried flowers into paste. There's no textbook, no test, but the precision is real. And it's not just instinct, it's pattern. She remembers which leaves brought the rash, which ones cooled it. She knows how long the wound took to close last time. She knows what worked, and she tells her daughter, who will tell her daughter. And suddenly, memory becomes survival. The first doctors weren't individuals. They were networks, webs of shared experience, observation, retelling. Around every fire, someone recalled a death, a miracle, a mistake. Don't mix that root with meat. Only drink that flower in the spring. Pack wounds with mud after the bleeding stops. None of this was written, but it was etched into habit, into ritual, into story. And then there were the shamans. You've seen one work. Painted in ochre and ash, they dance before treating. They speak to the wound, to the forest, to the wind. But beneath the ceremony lies something startlingly precise. They know which mushrooms numb the pain, which smokes draw out infection. They know how to keep the patient still, calm, open to healing. Maybe the gods hear them, maybe not, but the patient believes, and that belief heals more than any salve. The shaman is half therapist, half chemist, half actor. Three halves because their power defies logic. But they weren't working alone. Healing was never solo work. It was communal. When someone fell ill, others gathered. Some brought herbs, others brought warmth. Someone fetched water, another stoked the fire through the night. Someone held the hand of the one in pain. You felt that hand yourself, not trying to fix, just being there. That too was medicine. There was no waiting room, no insurance, no appointments. There was presence. And that presence taught you something. Healing was sacred not because it was rare, but because it was shared. And through all of this, knowledge built. Not fast, not clean, but layer by layer. You watched one woman crush bark into powder and mix it with bare grease. She applied it to a boil and the swelling vanished. Everyone remembered. A year later, someone else tried it on an infected tooth. It worked again. That memory moved like wind, invisible but felt. And so slowly, a kind of proto-science emerged. But not cold, not clinical. Warm-lived, intimate. Because when healing came, it came with eyes that had seen your pain, hands that had held others through it, and a mind that remembered every detail. There was no prestige in it, no hierarchy, only responsibility. You carry some of it now, don't you? That scar on your arm, you know exactly what to do if it happens again. You do what they did for you. You'd remember the smell of the crushed herbs, the texture of the cloth, the rhythm of the song. You'd pass it on. And that's the point. Healing wasn't hoarded. It was taught. It was lived. It was human. So when you look back on history and imagine cavemen groaning through injury and ignorance, you miss the truth. They had medics, not in white coats, but in furs in firelight with hands that had held generations of wounds. And they were damn good at it. Because their tools weren't just physical. They were relational. Empathy was their stethoscope. Memory was their record. And love, the fierce, protective kind that shows up at midnight with hot water and herbs, that was their hospital. So no, they didn't have modern science. But they had what mattered most. And when you're broken and afraid and burning with fever, it's not science you call for first. It's someone who knows what to do. Someone who remembers. And back then, someone always did. You kneel in the dirt, fingertips brushing the edge of bone. It's cool, smooth, and impossibly old. A femur half buried beneath centuries of silence. But it isn't the age that stops you. It's the fracture and what comes after it. This bone was broken, badly, a clean, forceful snap. But it healed. And not just with jagged, haphazard fusion. It healed straight, aligned, supported. Someone set this leg. Someone splinted it. Someone kept this person still for weeks, maybe months. Someone brought food, kept predators away, cleaned waste, watched for fever. This person survived. And suddenly, You're not looking at a skeleton. You're looking at care. Welcome to the most unexpected archive of ancient medicine, the grave. Every burial site is a testimony, every bone a silent page. And if you know how to read them, they tell a story far more advanced than we once imagined. Here's the truth: healing leaves marks, and bones remember. You lift a skull, there's a small, perfect hole bored into the cranium. Trepanation, a surgical opening made without modern tools, anesthesia, or sterile technique. And around the hole, the edges are smooth, a sign of healing. This wasn't a fatal wound. This was a medical intervention. Someone cut into this skull on purpose, and the person lived. Now pause and let that settle. Because for generations, we saw early humans as brutish, short-lived creatures ruled by fear, violence, and superstition. But these remains, these scars of survival, whisper something else entirely. They were skilled, they were attentive, they were doctors in their own right. In one burial, a man is missing an arm, amputated cleanly at the shoulder, but his bones show no signs of infection. He lived for years afterward. That means someone removed his limb, controlled the bleeding, treated the wound, and kept it clean, all without killing him. So, we don't know exactly, but we know they did it. In another grave, a child's skeleton shows evidence of congenital deformity, curved bones, shortened limbs. And yet the child lived into adolescence. That's not a fluke. That's support. Someone carried this child, fed them, protected them. Because medicine isn't always about cuts and cures. Sometimes it's simply about presence. Every healed break, every regrown tooth socket, every softened edge of trauma is a line in the story of prehistoric healthcare. And we're only just learning how to read it. The teeth, too, are loud with stories. Worn enamel patterns show the use of toothpicks, deliberate, habitual cleaning, signs of dental abscesses that drained and healed, jaws that adapted to loss with surprising resilience. You can even trace dietary shifts. What foods were chosen, avoided, or prepared differently to accommodate a mouth in pain. But it's not just about individuals. Entire burial sites speak of systems. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal male was buried with one arm amputated, one eye blind, and one leg partially paralyzed. He lived like this for years. Someone fed him, clothed him, treated his infections. That's not survival by accident. That's organized, empathetic care. And consider this: these same early humans who survived major trauma were often buried intentionally, carefully, with flowers, pigments, tools, which means they weren't just healed. They were honored. You begin to understand. The concept of the caveman as brutish and selfish was never true. These were people who mourned, who remembered, who healed each other not because it was efficient, but because it was human. You dust off another skeleton, this one with advanced arthritis. The joints are nearly fused, mobility painfully limited. And yet this person lived a full life, long enough to have their joints wear down. That means they were still useful, still loved, still part of the tribe. Because prehistoric medicine wasn't just about survival. It was about inclusion. Even the grave goods speak volumes. Stone tools with signs of wear modified for weaker hands. Cups for liquids placed near those with jaw damage. You realize these weren't tokens. They were adaptations. These graves aren't about death. They're about life after trauma. And it changes everything. You begin to think of wounds not as endings, but as beginnings of care, of community, of memory. Because that's what healing really is, a decision not to leave someone behind. And in grave after grave, across continents and millennia, early humans made that decision. We often talk about the birth of medicine as something that came later, with Hippocrates, with writing, with theory. But the bones say otherwise. The birth of medicine began when one human sat beside another and said, "You don't have to die from this," and then made it true. So you keep digging. A cracked rib healed, a shattered wrist rebuilt, a skull trauma that shows regeneration. These aren't anomalies. They're evidence that prehistoric humans weren't just passive victims of the wild. They were engineers of recovery. And that knowledge, that healing, was passed on not in books, but in scars. So you hold the bone in your hand and realize, this is more than an artifact. This is a monument to the oldest oath in history. Not do no harm, but stay, help, remember. You stand in the half-light of a stone chamber, the air still, the walls alive with paint, faded red ochre, smears of charcoal, handprints fossilized in silence. The flickering of your torch breathes life into every line. But today, you're not here to admire the animals. You're here to decode the wounds. Because once you look past the horses, the deer, the mammoths, you begin to see something stranger. Shapes that don't move, shapes that ache. A human figure with lines radiating from its head, pain, madness, fever. Another with a slash across the stomach, bent double, a wound, a birth. One more, a handprint with a finger missing, repeated 6 times in a spiral. Not an accident, a pattern, a story told without words. You realize these aren't just decorations, they're messages. And maybe instructions. Cave art has always been framed as aesthetic, evidence of imagination, ritual, culture. But what if it's more than that? What if some of these drawings were anatomical records? You trace a figure on the wall. It's abstract, not a hunt, not a dance. It shows a line through a thigh, another wrapping around a joint. Not precise by modern standards, but deliberate. Over and over again, these lines show up in similar places on different figures, across different caves. Consistency means intent. This wasn't idle doodling. This was documentation. Early humans had no written language, but they had paint, they had stone, and they had memory. You imagine the shaman, torch in hand, painting not to worship but to teach. This, they might say, gesturing to the figure with the broken leg drawn in red, is how the bone should sit. Or avoid this spot. When the spear went in here, the man did not rise again. The wall becomes a classroom, a storyboard, a living chart of wounds, survival, and anatomy. And the more you look, the deeper it gets. In some caves, red dots cluster around specific body parts: joints, ribs, temples. Some researchers believe these could indicate acupuncture points or their prehistoric equivalent, places of pain, of treatment, maybe pressure, maybe fire, maybe just understanding. Even more intriguing, some figures are marked with lines that resemble sutures, crossings over a gash, symmetrical, almost decorative. But you know better. You've seen ancient wound stitching techniques. These aren't designs, they're diagrams. And then there's color, not just for beauty. In several sites, figures are painted with black legs, red torsos, white faces. Not symbolic, but diagnostic. A feverish chest, a dead limb, a cold forehead. The palette becomes a prognosis. You begin to feel like an archaeologist of pain. But it's not all guesswork. Some clues are solid. In the Chauvet Cave in France, one of the oldest art sites in the world, a bison is drawn with a large dark circle on its side. The placement matches where you'd find the liver. It's too intentional to ignore. Could this be the first record of internal anatomy? A mark of where a spear must strike or where an illness festered? Across the globe, similar depictions emerge. In southern Africa, sand rock art shows human figures clutching their abdomens, their limbs thin, their faces contorted. Some researchers believe these are depictions of disease, possibly malaria or dysentery. In Australia, Aboriginal cave paintings include figures with exaggerated stomachs, marked hands, swollen joints, not the ideals of health, the opposite. These were symptoms, immortalized in stone. And that changes everything. Because art is often seen as a luxury, something you do when survival is secure. But here, it's the opposite. Art is survival. It's how knowledge was stored, not in tablets, not in books, but on walls that outlast the body. You're the interpreter now. The lines, the symbols, the contortions, they speak, if you know how to listen. You notice another strange pattern. Certain human shapes are accompanied by spirals or zigzags near the head or torso. At first glance, abstract. But when you think like a healer, a pattern emerges. Zigzag, pain, sharp stabbing. Spiral, dizziness, fever, confusion. These are symptoms drawn in universal symbols, the first pictographic medical records. And that begs the question, who was drawing these? It's not everyone, not randomly. It must have been those who observed pain most intimately, the caregivers, the shamans, the ones who saw wound after wound, remembered outcome after outcome, and decided not to keep it secret. They made it permanent. They made it public. Because even then, medicine was a collaboration. You look again at the handprints, dozens of them, layered like ghost echoes across the rock. Some are small, some are twisted, some are missing fingers. You realize these aren't signatures. They're testimonies. People who lived, people who suffered, people who healed. And the walls remember them. So next time someone tells you prehistoric humans were too primitive for science, too superstitious for medicine, remember this. They painted their pain. They archived their injuries. They encoded survival into stone. And we're still reading it. You crouch in the Amazon rainforest, listening. A healer chews a bitter leaf and spits it gently onto a wound. Half a world away, a Himalayan shepherd burns a juniper branch to cleanse the air around a feverish child. In the Australian outback, a grandmother grinds desert herbs into a thick, resinous paste. None of these people knew each other. None spoke the same language. None ever saw a cave painting in Europe. And yet their hands move with familiar rhythm. Their tools, their instincts, their care echo something ancient, something universal. Step beyond the caves now. Step beyond Europe and the narrow, textbook timelines of early humanity. Look around the globe to the cultures that remained close to the earth, the ones we call indigenous or tribal, and you'll find living evidence of prehistoric medicine still breathing in ceremony, ritual, and practical survival. Because the first aid kits of cavemen didn't vanish. They migrated. They evolved. They survived in the hands of people the modern world too often dismissed. You begin in the Amazon, where plants are not just scenery, they are medicine. Indigenous healers in the Yanomami and Matses tribes can identify hundreds of medicinal species by sight, smell, and touch. Many of these plants have no name in Latin pharmacology, but they work. A vine to stop bleeding. A bark that slows a heartbeat. A frog secretion burned into the skin, used as both vaccine and purge. These remedies were never written down, but passed through generation after generation, not as myths, but as methods. Next, the Arctic. The Inuit masters of cold, where healing meant knowing how to fight the cold from inside. Animal fats, not just food, but salve. The blubber of seals used to coat wounds and protect them from frost. Ice, paradoxically, as a balm for swelling. And bones, whale bone and caribou antler, carved into surgical tools that look eerily like what you saw in the caves. Now across the Pacific. In Polynesia, tattooing was more than decoration. It was a rite and a medical act. Charcoal ink mixed with antiseptic plant oils. The process opened wounds, yes, but also trained immunity, toughened skin, marked moments of transformation. The pain was part of the treatment. In Aboriginal Australia, you find dreamtime stories that double as diagnostic maps. Descriptions of snakes, spirits, or storms that mirror neurological conditions, fevers, infections. You learn that metaphor wasn't superstition. It was translation, a way to describe illness before biology had a vocabulary. You begin to see a pattern. Around the world, primal healing follows a shared script, even when the stage is different. Fire heat from fire pits, from stones, from the sun, used to draw out illness, reduce pain, or purge infection. Herb plants, local, sacred, bitter, and pungent, chewed, smoked, poulticed, or boiled. Animals, fat, horn, sinew, venom, not feared, but integrated into healing logic. Musical notes, ritual, song, rhythm, repetition, not as magic but as mental architecture, a psychological brace for pain and fear. Busts in silhouette community, healing was never solitary, always witnessed, always held. Even more striking is how many of these remedies work, as confirmed by modern science. Honey, used by the Maasai to dress wounds, is now known to be antibacterial. Willow bark, chewed by Native Americans for pain, contains salicin, the molecule that led to aspirin. Charcoal poultices, fermented plant pastes, smoke as antiseptic, all once seen as superstition now proven by laboratory. But these weren't just accidental. They were tested, observed, remembered, refined. In Papua New Guinea, you meet highland tribes who use red clay to treat burns, the same mineral composition as ochre found in Paleolithic Europe. In the Amazon, you watch a ritual where a boy is given small doses of venom from bullet ants, a practice that creates long-term immunity to severe insect bites. Across West Africa, you witness the use of certain fungi not for food, but to stave off rot in wounds. Penicillin wasn't invented, it was rediscovered. And yet, in every case, the same modern question hangs over these practices. But how did they know? The same way the cavemen knew. Through observation, through failure, through watching animals, through trial, error, and remembering what worked. And perhaps more importantly, by sharing what worked. No textbooks, just story, songs, dances, rhythms. You realize that even now, these cultures carry the blueprint of the first medics. Their methods aren't just relics, they're living fossils of ancient science. But this chapter carries a darker truth, too. Because these knowledge systems, these human archives of healing, are vanishing. When the forest is burned, the medicine disappears. When a grandmother dies without passing on her plant names, that lineage, sometimes tens of thousands of years long, is broken. We've already lost more than we'll ever recover. So this chapter isn't just a comparison. It's a warning that the roots of medicine aren't only found in labs or hospitals. They are in the ashes of the fire pit, in the calloused hands of a midwife, in the soft humming of a lullaby used to ease fever. And those roots must be protected. You step back from the global tour, and the echo is unmistakable. From the Arctic to the Amazon, from aboriginal deserts to Himalayan caves, the core principles of prehistoric healing persist. These cultures remind you that first aid wasn't invented in one place, by one people, with one method. It was a human response to human pain. Everywhere. Always. So now, when you look back at the caveman's first aid kit, you don't see it as something buried in the past. You see it as something still alive, if you know where to look. You watch the ember glow of a fire fade into torchlight. Shadows stretch longer. The caves are left behind, but the wounds stay the same. The spear still pierces flesh. The fever still burns. The bone still breaks. What changes now is memory. You're no longer crouched in a forest with a pouch of resin and bone. You're in a mud brick dwelling, a village. People don't just migrate, they settle. Agriculture blooms, and with it, population. And with population comes one inevitable thing: injury at scale. First aid, once improvised in the wild, must now adapt. In Mesopotamia, you kneel beside a clay tablet. The cuneiform etched into it isn't just law or trade. It's instructions, medical ones, a catalog of treatments and observations from splinting fractures to poulticing abscesses. You realize you're seeing something new, the systematization of care. Trial and error is still here, but now it's being recorded. In Egypt, you walk through sun-drenched corridors lined with papyrus scrolls, some of the earliest medical documents on Earth. One scroll lists over 800 remedies, from how to treat a dislocated jaw to the steps for stitching a chest wound. Some you recognize: honey, herbs, pressure. Others feel more ritualized. Magic spells woven into care. But you understand, in this world, medicine is half science, half incantation, and both matter. You hold a copper surgical tool in your hand. It feels cold but refined, sharpened not by accident but by intention. The first flint scalpels have given way to metallurgy, and now, for the first time, humans can cut with precision. Civilization did not invent healing, but it accelerated it. In ancient India, the Sushruta Samhita lays out detailed surgical procedures, even plastic reconstruction of the nose, not for vanity but justice. Mutilation was a punishment, reconstruction, a form of redemption. Here, medicine becomes a social force. In China, thousands of years ago, bamboo strips describe acupuncture points. You watch as pain is not just soothed, it is mapped. The human body becomes a system and its ailments navigable terrain. Greece, you step into a temple not to pray but to heal. The temples of Asclepius become the world's first proto-hospitals. Pilgrims sleep overnight on stone floors, hopping for a dream, a divine prescription. The staff and serpent, the symbol of modern medicine, is born here. But underneath the divine lies something else: observation, pattern, care. And then Hippocrates. The man is not a myth here, he's a reformer. He argues that disease is not punishment from gods but imbalance in the body. He treats fever with cool compresses, not prayer. He applies wine to wounds, early antisepsis. He listens to symptoms. He watches for changes. He teaches others to do the same. You realize you're watching medicine split into two rivers: belief and biology. And in the best cases, like Hippocrates, they flow together. In Rome, you stand beside soldiers, not in war, but in a field tent lined with medical tools. Rome's army created a revolution: the first emergency medics, field surgeons, mobile hospitals, trauma care on the battlefield. They knew that wounded soldiers, if treated quickly, could return to fight. First aid became strategy. Their instruments: familiar, scalpels, forceps, bone saws, speculums. Some are near identical to modern versions. And sterilization: boiling water, wine, vinegar, crude but effective. You see that civilization, for all its advancement, kept many of the caveman's instincts, just sharpened them. But not all progress moves forward. As empires collapse, knowledge is scattered. The Dark Ages aren't devoid of healing, but they regress. Superstition reasserts itself. Barber surgeons replace trained medics. Bloodletting becomes a cure-all. The balance between ritual and science tilts hard toward fear. And yet, in the shadows, the old wisdom is kept alive. In Islamic cities, scholars preserve Greek and Roman texts, translate them, expand on them. Hospitals, real ones, are established in Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba. Triage is formalized. Pharmacology advances. Mental illness is treated not with chains but with music. You walk through a ward where patients are cared for with dignity. It feels modern, human. In Mesoamerica, you find Aztec healers using obsidian blades sharper than surgical steel. Their botanical knowledge rivals any European apothecary. In sub-Saharan Africa, you watch surgeries performed with antiseptic barks and astonishing survival rates. You realize civilization doesn't have one center, it has many. Some are just ignored by history books. First aid was no longer a pouch of bone and fiber. It was a profession, a calling. But the core never changed. You still see someone kneeling beside the wounded. Still see hands moving fast, sure, and instinctive. Still see materials from the world, whether plant, animal, or mineral, used to slow death and extend life. You walk now from fire-lit caves to the fluorescent light of a modern hospital, and you realize the path between them is direct, a straight, unbroken thread of human adaptation, observation, and care. The caveman's kit never disappeared. It was upgraded, refined, globalized. But the logic, the motive, it was always the same. Something is broken, something hurts, and someone, anyone, must try to fix it. You sit in a sterile hospital room, surrounded by gleaming machines and plastic-wrapped instruments. It feels far removed from the dirt, bone, and fire of prehistoric life. But look closer, and you'll see the past whispering beneath every bandage, every pill, every procedure. Modern medicine is a towering achievement, but its roots run deep into the soil of ancient wisdom. Take antibiotics, for example. You've heard stories about Alexander Fleming's serendipitous discovery of penicillin, a mold that killed bacteria. But that mold was not new to human experience. For millennia, indigenous peoples used moldy bread or fermented plant matter to dress wounds, unknowingly harnessing nature's microscopic warriors. They lacked microscopes but knew, through observation, that some substances stopped infection. Tree resins, sticky, aromatic, and waterproof, were once the glue in a caveman's first aid kit. Today, scientists study those same resins to develop advanced wound dressings that protect and accelerate healing while fighting bacteria. The chemistry isn't new. It's been there all along, waiting for us to pay attention. And what about pain relief? Willow bark was chewed by Neolithic humans long before aspirin became a household name. Modern pharmacology purified its active ingredient, salicin, transforming a bitter bark into a global medicine. But the origins, they're prehistoric. Even surgical tools bear ancestral marks. The fine scalpels, forceps, and needles of today evolved from sharpened stones, bones, and shells, primitive but effective. Some indigenous cultures still craft these implements with skill that rivals modern precision. You begin to see how modern medicine doesn't just replace ancient knowledge, it builds on it. Yet there's more than chemistry and tools. Prehistoric healing also offers a lesson in holism. Early humans treated the body and mind as one. Rituals, songs, and community support were as vital as herbs or poultices. Today, medicine increasingly embraces this integration, recognizing the power of psychological and social factors in healing. You realize that many breakthroughs in pain management, infection control, and wound care owe their lineage to the trial and error of our distant ancestors. Even new frontiers like bioprospecting, where scientists explore rainforests for novel compounds, trace back to indigenous knowledge passed down through millennia. But there's a warning, too. As we marvel at these connections, we must ask, how much have we lost? How many ancient remedies were erased by colonization, deforestation, or cultural extinction? Each lost tradition is a lost opportunity, a missing chapter in the ongoing story of human healing. This chapter closes with a clear message. The past is not a museum. It's a library, a laboratory, a blueprint. Modern medicine's brightest future may well depend on rediscovering the wisdom hidden in prehistoric first aid kits. And now it's your turn to listen. You clutch your injured arm, hoping the poultice will stop the pain. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the wound festers, the fever rises, the pain worsens. The ancient first aid kit wasn't a miracle, it was a gamble. For every leaf that soothed, there was one that poisoned. For every bone needle that stitched, one that infected. Healing in prehistoric times was a desperate, precarious balance, more often trial and error than guaranteed relief. You confront the harsh reality that early humans faced. Death was common, even from small injuries. Infection was the unseen enemy. Without knowledge of germs, wounds were often left open to decay. Some remedies actually worsened conditions. For example, mud or clay poultices, while cooling, sometimes trapped bacteria instead of killing it. Smoke and fire could sterilize air, but direct contact with ashes or soot might irritate wounds or cause burns. Superstition often filled the gaps in understanding. When a treatment failed, blame fell on spirits or curses. Shamans might perform rituals, but sometimes these prolonged suffering instead of easing it. You witness the psychological toll, fear of infection compounded by helplessness. Rituals and placebo could bring comfort, but they were no substitute for effective care. Some remedies were outright harmful. Certain plants used as painkillers, like poppy milk or nightshade, could be toxic or addictive. Sharp tools risked more injury or fatal bleeding. Attempts at primitive surgery without anesthesia or sterilization were excruciating and perilous. You begin to see that prehistoric medicine was a battlefield. Sometimes nature was the healer. Sometimes it was the executioner. This chapter is not a dismissal of ancient knowledge. It is a cautionary tale. It honors the bravery of those who tried to heal despite the unknowns, while recognizing the limits and dangers they faced. You end this chapter with a sobering reflection. Every advance in medicine is built not only on discovery, but on the hard lessons of failure. You stand at the edge of a dense forest, the wind rustling leaves around you. You're miles from the nearest town, no modern pharmacy within reach. Suddenly, a sharp pain shoots through your hand, a cut, raw and bleeding. What do? Now, imagine you have only what ancient humans carried in their first aid kits. No plastic bandages, no antiseptic sprays, just nature's tools, honed by thousands of years of trial, error, and survival. You reach into your pouch. What essentials must be there? Start with the obvious, something to stop the bleeding. You remember the crushed leaves of yarrow, known to ancient healers for their clotting properties. Or perhaps the sticky resin from pine trees, nature's own adhesive and antibacterial agent. These could be your first defense. Next, consider pain. Willow bark, bitter but effective, was the original aspirin. Would you carry a small bundle of dried bark, knowing it could dull your suffering when no pills are around? Then protection. How do you keep dirt and infection out of wounds? Animal fats such as bear or deer grease were used to create waterproof barriers. You might pack a small container, preserving it for emergencies. But survival is more than just treating injuries. What about tools? A sharpened bone or flint blade could double as a scalpel, precise and reliable. Plant fibers, woven tightly, might serve as thread to stitch wounds closed. You think further. What about remedies for infection? Certain herbs like garlic or sage have natural antimicrobial properties. Would you include these fresh or dried? Beyond physical items, you carry knowledge. You know which plants soothe, which ones sting. You understand rituals to calm your mind, to ease panic and injury. You begin assembling your kit, a blend of ancient wisdom and modern insight. It's small, lightweight, and intimately connected to the world around you. This is not a survival fantasy. It's a reconnection to the roots of human healing. You realize that while your smartphone might carry a medical app, the real first aid begins with nature, observation, and respect. So what would you carry? And more importantly, do you truly know what's inside your modern kit? You close your eyes and travel back tens of thousands of years. You stand in the flickering firelight of a cave, surrounded by the first healers, those who dared to treat wounds without knowing what lay beneath the skin, who gathered plants and resins with trembling hands, who saw the broken and chose to help rather than abandon. Their world was brutal, unforgiving, and uncertain. Yet in their hands, something remarkable was born, the seed of human resilience. Every bandage you wrap, every balm you soothe your skin with, every healing ritual you witness or partake in, all are threads woven from this ancient tapestry. The cavemen's first aid kits were not just collections of materials. They were the earliest expressions of something profoundly human, the will to survive and to care. You realize that these innovations weren't accidental. They arose from desperate necessity, yes, but also from curiosity, compassion, and community. The first healer was also a witness, an experimenter, a storyteller. Their knowledge was passed down, refined, and expanded through countless generations. It was memory in motion, a living archive of hope. Consider the resilience embedded in this legacy. Early humans faced injury, infection, and death daily. Yet they survived, they adapted, they thrived. Their tools and techniques were the foundation stones of medicine, physiology, and even psychology. The understanding that healing is both physical and mental, body and mind, emerged from their practices. The ritualistic songs and ceremonies were not mere superstition. They were the first attempts to harness the mind's power in recovery. Now, as you live in a world of hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and advanced surgeries, pause and reflect. The elegance of these modern systems owes everything to that primal struggle. The wisdom of observing nature's cures, of improvising tools from bones and fibers, of recognizing pain and fear as parts of the healing journey. These are not relics, but the roots of today's medical knowledge. You also see a deeper truth. Healing is not only science, it is profoundly human. It is an act of empathy that transcends time and culture. The first aiders of prehistory reached beyond survival. They forged bonds, crafted meaning, and affirmed life. The tapestry continues to grow, embroidered with discoveries and innovations. Yet its core remains unchanged: care, connection, and resilience. Every time you tend to a wound, soothe a pain, or comfort a fearful mind, you carry forward this legacy. You are part of an unbroken chain, a story of survival shaped not just by biology, but by compassion. The story of the cavemen's first aid kits is ultimately a story of you. You stand at the crossroads of time, where ancient earth meets the gleaming promise of the future. Behind you lies a journey through the dirt and flame of prehistory, the shadowed caves where the first hands learned to soothe pain, to bind wounds, and to hope. Ahead stretches a horizon of scientific marvels: gene therapies, robotic surgeons, and medicines crafted from the very code of life. But between these two worlds there is a thread, invisible yet unbreakable. It's the primal drive to heal, to endure, to protect one another. You have traced it through thousands of years, from sharpened bones and bitter barks to sterile labs and life-saving breakthroughs. And now, as you stand here, you realize that this thread is you. The cavemen who first carried leaves and resins in their packs were not just survivors. They were pioneers of compassion, curiosity, and resilience. Their fragile steps toward healing laid the groundwork for everything that followed. You see their echoes in every medicine, every bandage, every act of care you witness or perform. What does this mean for you in your modern world filled with instant access and digital comfort? It means that healing is more than technology. It's connection, it's memory, it's the story we carry in our blood and bones. You understand that medicine is not a static field but a living conversation between past and future. The ancient remedies once dismissed as superstition are now subjects of rigorous study, inspiring new treatments and sustainable health care. Nature remains the greatest pharmacy, waiting patiently for us to listen. This moment is a call to action, to respect the knowledge of the past even as you innovate for the future, to carry forward the humility of early healers who worked without certainty but with fierce dedication, to recognize that healing is not just the absence of disease, but the presence of hope. As the sun sets on this journey, you feel something profound: gratitude. Gratitude for those who dared to care when death was a constant companion. Gratitude for the endless human spirit that turns pain into progress. and gratitude for your place in this ongoing story. So, what will you carry forward? Will you honor the wisdom of nature's first apothecaries? Will you embrace the balance of mind and body in healing? Will you stand as a modern steward of an ancient legacy? The answer is yours. And in choosing it, you become part of something greater, a lineage of healers stretching back to the dawn of humanity, moving ever forward, lighting the path for those who will come after. Your first aid kit is no longer just a collection of tools. It is a symbol, a bridge, a testament. You carry the past into the future, and that is the greatest healing of all.